Whoever wants to start.
Recording in progress.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Cathy Stewart. I am the National Organizing Director at Open Primaries, the country's leading organization on primary reform. I've worked on this issue of the exclusion of New York City independent voters for 23 years, as Diane knows. My late husband, Harry Kresge, served on the 2002 Charter Revision Commission that considered the issue. And in 2003, I played a leadership role in the unsuccessful campaign to pass nonpartisan elections, question 3. I actually want to take a moment to share a personal story that I actually think addresses a number of the things we've been grappling with. As an independent voter who lived in New York City for 33 years, in 2021, after decades of being unable to cast a meaningful ballot for my local representatives, there was a nonpartisan special election for city council in my neighborhood. I lived in the Bronx. I got phone calls. I got mailings from multiple campaigns. It was shocking and very refreshing. I actually got a phone call from a candidate himself, and we had a very engaged and thoughtful conversation about this very issue. He told me no one had ever asked him to address the issue of primary structure. When I went into the voting booth, my vote mattered. It made a difference. I was a full participant in selecting my council member, and I got to use ranked choice voting for the first time. I lived in New York City for 33 years. That was the first and only time I played a role in selecting my most local elected official. It should not, and it cannot be the case that independent voters cannot fully participate on the same terrain as party members. In a special election only, every election should be special and magical. I want a system where every voter has the right to participate fully, as they do in 85% of cities across the country. And those cities, by the way, have very strong party structures. It has not hurt the party structure. I commend the Commission for your responsiveness to this issue and to hearing from scores of New Yorkers who've asked you to consider this profound crisis, a primary system that deliberately excludes 1.1 million independents from elections that they pay for, that determine the leadership of the city. I know you're looking at various forms of open primaries, various models. At Open Primaries, my organization, we're less focused on the specific model and more focused on the tremendous opportunity we have this year and the importance of taking a step forward on this critical and growing voting rights issue in the city. I want to urge the Commission to take a path forward. You don't have to solve every issue, but you have a chance this year to advance a proposal that would give the franchise to over 1 million people. Hope you'll ask me some questions on the turnout.
Thank you, Ms. Stewart. I have to say, I've never heard anyone be excited about receiving campaign mailers and phone calls. I'm sort of fascinated by that.
As independents, we never get them.
Susan, please continue.
Hi, thank you. I'm Susan Lerner. I'm the Executive Director of Common Cause New York. And I think it's very telling that my companion here does not have a preference, but likes the concept of open primaries. Our elections are very complicated. And as we have seen, there is absolutely no consensus as to what would be the appropriate form of primary reform in our city. Citizens Union has one model. Reinvent Albany has another. Common Cause has talked about the semi-open primary. And actually, last hearing, Gwen Mandel from the Independent Voting Organization said, keep it simple. So what we have seen is a lack of consensus. And in fact, today, a letter was released from 13 unions and 27 organizations who actually talk to voters day in and day out. And they've said, why are you surprising us with this? What has happened as a consequence is actually not a thorough discussion, because a thorough discussion would review the actual research. For instance, the desire for greater electoral participation may be an admirable goal, but little evidence suggests the top 2 primaries is a successful method for achieving it. A report by Professor Patterson of the Southern Oregon University in Electoral Studies 60. He goes on to say, estimating the unintended, general elections featuring two members of the same party, the arrangement reformers contend would increase turnout, actually decreases voter participation. I find that approximately 7% of voters roll off the ballot in the absence of party competition, while overall turnout is unaffected. These results suggest the top two primaries are likely to exacerbate rather than ameliorate trends in participation. And then there's a very interesting piece by Seth Mascat at the University of Denver, which is entitled "What Is and Isn't Causing Polarization in Modern State Legislatures." He says there is little relationship between the openness of a primary system and the ideological extremism of the elected officials it produces. So the question really is, if we are looking to involve the unaffected 1.1 million, which as Ms. Savino pointed out, we have studied, then I think we need to get beyond the concept of open primaries, and we need to have a community-wide discussion of what form. And I am concerned that instead of having a broad-based discussion, we are now facing a situation where some substantial portion of those who are politically engaged have been forced into an automatic no position. Because what they're really concerned about is more the general primary, but now they are lumping in open primaries, and we are not having a detailed discussion about what we're trying to achieve, and we're not bringing in a larger, broader selection of people to support the concept and the specific type of open primary that we think will work in New York City. So there is no rush. We are not going to have another municipal primary for 4 years. Give us an opportunity to build a consensus and come back to the next Charter Revision Commission with a consensus, at least 70 to 80% of those who are engaged, what form of open primary, rather than having a top-down decision there.
Thank you. I did a quick question, which may not be easy to answer, but I'm sort of struggling with the paradigm. One about the top-down decision-making process that is actually up for referendum, so ultimately it depends on the will of the voters. So I would love to, and I ask this because I do trust your judgment, so I ask this honestly. I'm just trying to balance that. And the second thing I'm trying to balance is the perspective that we need more time, because we also know this issue has been considered by numerous Charter Revision Commissions over years. It's actually been put on the ballot before. Ton of organizations and research. It seemed to me that there was a fairly strong evidence base. I mean, we can disagree. People can reasonably disagree, but it's hard for me to understand how more time after decades of consideration. So I do really want to sort of test.
So first of all, I am concerned that we now have a fairly sizable opposition that at the beginning of your discussion we did not have, that we have polarized the issue, and as you point out, if it goes on the ballot and fails, we're going to wait for another 20 years to try and solve what is a significant issue, which is a significant number of people who are outside of the primary. In terms of more time, I think because of the number of people who have become an organization, who have become concerned about a decision being made without a broader base of discussion, that again, we are polarizing the issue, and we have not had an opportunity to really build the base of support for some form of open primaries that we were able to build for ranked choice voting. Now, why organizations don't pay attention to this issue earlier, I don't have an explanation. We certainly did a study 2 years ago, but now the organizations that talk most frequently to voters are focused on it, and I think the very diverse communities and organizations that talk day in and day out to voters should have an opportunity to weigh the different types of open primaries and come back with a consensus. And then we won't have to worry about it failing in the ballot, and then we don't have a solution for another 20 years.
Richard, I'd like to hear the response from the other panelists, please.
Thank you. Thanks, Susan.
Well, let me start by saying, and Susan knows this, I supported ranked choice voting, even though, as someone who's organizing the independent voter community, none of those voters who voted for it could use it. So, and again, I think if we miss the opportunity this year, it's gone for 20 years again. I've been there, done it. And I want to point out there's just a lot of work to do to understand this claim that's being made by some that it doesn't increase turnout. You've got to look at the way they've done the statistics. In California, when you increase the pool of voters by 4 million, well, you got to think about the denominator and that's changed when you look at those turnout figures. That's one thing I would say. I think it's worth looking at the bipartisan center's studies on this. They've looked at it. They see that there was an increase in turnout. They looked at Colorado's change. They've looked at Oklahoma locally. And I would say that we have to look at the fact that there's 1.1 million New Yorkers who pay for these elections. I just think we can't wait. That's why, in part, what we're saying is, look, maybe there's a step this year and another commission can take another step. But let's not miss an opportunity that this commission opened the door for, because you listen to people come to you. It's remarkable. I can't, when I say I really commend you, I do, because that is a remarkable thing that happened. And I can tell you in the independent voter community across the city and the country, people are very heartened by this. So I think we have to relook at the stats. I think we have to relook at why is the opposition opposing it. Surely they're not telling voters like me that we are going to hurt union members or communities of color. I resent that, especially since 53% of independent voters in this city are Black, Latino, and Asian. I resent that. That's got to be examined under a microscope. I hope that addresses.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Can I ask one question? Ms. Lerner, I'm curious your thoughts on, do you think with more time we actually could get to consensus? We've heard a lot of testimony on different viewpoints of different types of open primaries, and there has been a lot of research about the different types that we've had the opportunity to read and assess. So I'm curious what makes you believe we actually could get to consensus with more time?
Because nobody has actually tried to build a consensus. We do have the experience of doing that with ranked choice voting. We know it takes time. We know it requires engaging, to begin with, the 27 organizations that now are on record as being against the concept of open primary.
Those organizations have been on record against open primaries for 20 years plus. So this is nothing new.
So
you know that, Susan,
you
so it's a
also-
little disingenuous to testify otherwise.
So among the organizations that we work with, over 50 organizations that are way beyond the 27, that represent communities across the city, all of them have come to us and said, what is going on? Why did we not know about this? And what are we supposed to make of it? Because none of our people have come to us about open primaries, and we need some time to figure out what this is about. So it's not a question of opposing open primaries, although we now are seeing a more polarized situation. But again, it's going into the details of figuring out what form of open primaries would work here. And I have to say that the research is pretty overwhelming in terms of the California system not doing very much of anything other than rearranging the furniture.
I have another question, Susan, because I know you're concerned about the organizations that sent an anonymous letter with the listing of their organizations. Not a single signatory on that letter, by the way. That's persuasive to me. But moving that aside, your organization works on this issue day in and day out. That's what you do. So to what extent do you see Common Cause and the other good government groups as part of the reason of responsible for educating, whether it's organizations that you work with or others? This is not a new concept. It's been dealt with here before. We rejected it in 2003, and I think then for the right reason, but it was a very different time. But now, the work that you've done, you come to talk to me about it, whether I was up in Albany or here at City Hall, about how do we expand the franchise to include more voters who have specifically told your organization they do not want to belong to a party. So how do we just say, well, we need more time to talk to people who, don't want to hear it? There are some people who will never listen to this.
Well, but what I'm hearing from are the people who are actually eager to learn more about it, but feel overwhelmed by the fact that the primary, right, the ranked choice voting primary is tomorrow, that they have spent the last 4 months trying to educate their voters in Mandarin, in Korean, in Cantonese, in Urdu, in various languages, and they basically feel overburdened. It's not that they don't want to focus on it, it's that they actually have to deal with what's directly in front of their voters. And I have to say that there is a certain amount of disrespect to those who are politically active to hold this hearing on the night before the primary. It shows that you do not want to hear from those who are politically engaged. I was genuinely surprised.
But we've had,
But my response is what it has been from the beginning, which is if you feel you have to go forward with something that will be in effect in 4 years, then I would agree with the advocate who testified last time and say, keep it simple. Make it as easy as possible, and that is a semi-open primary. If what you are concerned about is that it is unfair for 1.1 million not to be able to vote in a primary, then allow them to vote in a primary. It's the simplest, easiest thing to explain. It has the least disruptive factor, and it isn't just rearranging the furniture for what academics tell us gains us nothing.
So, thank you. I just want to take one point. We've had, as you know, I think nearly a dozen public hearings, or not all tonight. So I just think fairly, we have had and will just continue to have public hearings, and so I don't think it's completely fair to say that somehow it's disrespectful to folks to have a hearing tonight. We're trying to accommodate a lot of people and a lot of schedules across a large city, and certainly no intent is made by that, but I don't think it's fair to sort of use tonight's schedule as somehow excluding other voices. And the only other thing I would say, again, I asked the question because I do take the perspective seriously. I think the only thing I would encourage you and your partners to consider is that there is a risk that with less time, there is less time to consider. There's also a risk that you could take more time and never have a commission that's willing to put this on the ballot again. I think there are risks in every process. I do think that this, as you know, this is on our agenda not by design, but because we heard tons of people who want it on our agenda, and it would seem to be disrespectful not to consider those voters as well. So I just want to say that because I just want to be clear that we are trying to accommodate the voices that we're hearing, and we're of course always open to hearing additional voices, and there is still time to do so.
If I could, I wanted to address one thing, Susan, about what you were saying about all of the organizations, and I commend them for all the work they're doing to educate and activate people in the primary. There are independent voters who are getting ready to picket some of those polls tomorrow because they're sick and tired of paying for primaries that are essentially private. And I would point out that the reason that the exact thing you're saying, that all these organizations who are doing good work within the party structure had no idea that this was an issue of concern to thousands and thousands of voters. That's the disconnect that we have to solve. And this is not radical. Most cities in the country use it. And also, by the way, you heard testimony from USC that shows the impact. The more closed the system is, the lower the turnout in communities of color. It's really time to take a step forward, and it's been studied. And I would say, Susan, Common Cause is in a great position to play a leadership role with all those organizations. I mean, you did a remarkable study. So I think you're well positioned to help move the needle on the education front. You and I have talked about that over the years too.
And when I have raised it, the groups have said to me, not now.
Right, well, 1.1 million voters can't keep waiting.
And again, you've heard
From one academic, I will be sending you a large number of studies which contest that position.
Thank you both so much, and thank you for engaging with us. I really appreciate it.